Okay, so my name's Keir. I think some of you may have met me from being involved in research in the Dementia Research Centre, or just seen me at some of the PCA Support Groups. So I'm a research assistant at the Dementia Research Centre, and I do a part-time PhD with a particular emphasis on reading problems in PCA. Now, reading problems tend to present as quite a prominent and often early symptom in PCA. I've been working on my PhD now for just over 2 years, starting off with looking at problems reading letters and then problems reading single words. But as of last year, I've started looking particularly at problems reading at the sort of passage text level. So yeah, in PCA there's quite a few visual symptoms that may contribute towards poor reading at a passage level. The first of which has been termed a restriction in the affected field of vision. Now this figure here is actually a bit of a simplification in that it's not a case of people with PCA just not being able to identify any information in peripheral vision. It's more a case that often people with PCA have problems extracting the correct information from peripheral vision than they would do in central vision. Now, another visual symptom in PCA that may contribute towards reading problems is visual disorientation. Now, this can refer to just in everyday life people having problems localizing things in visual space. That being an example of what may happen when people look at text reading. And anecdotally, people have reported things like text jittering or text sliding around. Another thing that may contribute towards poor reading is something that's been termed foveal crowding. Now, visual crowding is actually something that everyone experiences in peripheral vision, but from some data that we've collected over the past couple of years, it seems that actually this crowding effect is happening in foveal or central vision in the case of a lot of people with PCA. Now, crowding refers to an excessive integration of visual information. And again, unfortunately, this figure is a slight oversimplification in that it's likely that crowding is actually happening across words. So it's not as if just individual words are being condensed. It's possible that aspects of words next to each other may swap over, for example, parts of letters. And this is something which is particularly evident in terms of when you have a lot of other words. So in terms of these just 3 visual symptoms that we often see in PCA, it's very likely that these are contributing towards reading problems, particularly in ways such as people reporting having problems losing their place on a page, for example, skipping a couple of lines, and also people mentioning they find it hard focusing on a relevant word or piece of information on a page. And so what we've done as of late last year is try and play with different methods of text presentation in order to minimize these visual symptoms and hopefully facilitate reading in a lot of people we see throughout PCA. Now, we started off doing this in a very simple way. So one method of presentation which minimizes all these visual symptoms is actually just presenting text in chunks of single words. So instead of having the whole article presented at once, you just present it one word at a time, like so. So far we've only seen 11 participants, but out of those, the average accuracy has actually gone up from 56% with normally presented text to a 95% using this single word presentation. In addition, of these 11 participants, they tended to find single word presentation easier to use. They felt they understood the text of the article better, and also found it more pleasant using this type of presentation. And this is particularly important given how ultimately we want to use what we know about ways of altering text presentation in order to facilitate reading. We want to be able to use them on a website or on a piece of downloadable software. And we want them not just to increase people's reading speed or reading accuracy, but also for people to feel a tangible benefit and for people to actually want to use this in everyday life. and at the moment, me and Seb are actually applying for grants for web developer to help us actually design a website and hopefully make this sort of, hopefully design a software which will be freely available to people. And I just want to thank all the participants who helped out with this research, my supervisor Seb and Tim Shakespeare and Alzheimer's Research UK, who supports my PhD. Any questions?
I'm just making a comment. It's, I mean, I'm disappointed with what you're saying, really, because what you're saying is very obvious. You know, you pick up a piece of paper, you can't read it, so you know you've got bad eyes.
Yeah.
You know, and you can't. And there's other things like I have problems with the telephone. Well, you know, sort of one follows the other, doesn't it? You know, sort of. I don't think I need you correcting.
I'm sorry, so Mr. Iscott, so you're saying the problem is that it's a more general problem. So in terms of that, for example, the problems you have answering the phone can also relate to your reading.
Well, there's all kinds of things. I mean, you know, sometimes I can read the number 9 bus, but that is not perhaps consistent.
Yeah, I think what we're hopefully trying to do is get a better idea of how you can have these strange contradictions. So, for example, some people might be able to see from a distance the number of a bus, but yet when they've got a piece of paper right in front of them, they might not be able to read it. And we're trying to figure out, because there are some patterns that are emerging here, some of them being, for example, one of the first things I showed was this restriction in the effective field of vision, where sometimes if something is so big in front of someone, they can't pick out all the information, whereas if they see something very small in distance, they can still pick up relevant bits of information. And hopefully what we're trying to do is pick up on what the strengths of people we have, the people who we see with PCA, and try and build upon those, because it can be a case where someone can look at, you know, a letter and be like, I just can't make any sense of that at all. But actually, if we do show them just individual parts of that, the same letter, they can actually pick up information from that. But again, we're picking up on sorts of patterns. Some things, even though these may be general themes, they might not apply to individual people as well.
Maybe a premature question, but what sort of timescale is behind the software?
I'm really trying to have it done as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, I need to submit my PhD by the end of the year, but ideally, even though it's only 11 participants, it's enough that we can say there's quite a reliable effect of this type of presentation. And unfortunately, I would have liked to look at a lot of different methods of presentation, but actually to do that methodically, we should really be focusing on one or two. So I think the next step we take it to is incorporating things like, it was actually mentioned earlier, using tinted glasses, because there's some evidence in developmental dyslexia in terms of you know, kids who have problems reading, that this can actually assist things like, some people reported as jittering with developmental dyslexics, that these tinted glasses can actually ameliorate that. And that would be just one of the extra things we'll be looking at the next stage of the development of the software. But ideally, I would like to have the next version out by early next year. So.
When you look at works in the beginning and people have a problem, PCA sufferer has a problem reading, I found with David, prior to diagnosis, one of the first things I noticed wasn't words, because you can guess if you see the edges of the word. Lines of numbers, however, was a really good early indication. I wondered if you looked at that, because he couldn't tell whether there were 3 1s followed by 2 3s. He couldn't accurately read a line of number before there was anything indicating on words.
There's a couple. Oh, sorry. So the question was, one of the very early symptoms in terms of the course of David's PCA was not so much problem reading single words, or even, do you say lines of text?
Yeah, lines of text was fine.
But it was more a case of reading numbers.
Writing down a phone number, reading a phone number, absolutely impossible.
Yeah, there's a couple of very interesting things about this. For one, with numbers, I think a lot of things to do with numbers in PCA, they seem to be quite vulnerable actually. So even the fact that it's a number rather than a word, I think some people can have more pronounced problems with. However, there's also the fact that, as you were saying, unfortunately, for some people who are slightly, the whole question. But yeah, you stated this very good point that with reading words, you can actually read the outline of words. You don't have to read all the constituent components. You don't have to read every single letter to actually get an idea of the word. Whereas with letters, if you're reading the number 1082, you tend to have to still look at each number. And it does seem that in lots of people with PCA, this act of having to look at every these sort of small components, people might have a tendency to make more errors using that approach. But yeah, another thing is, again, as you mentioned in your question, how it's also sort of guessing that even with reading a line of text, you can sort of infer parts of the text. I imagine what you were saying. The problem with this is that actually, with having looked at reading of single words in PCA and then gone on to text reading, actually in the case of a lot of people with PCA, their text reading is better than what you predict in a single word reading. Because actually, for lots of people with PCA, they have what we would call sort of top-down support, where actually people can use, they can sort of predict where the sentence will go to sort of make up. Even if they can't see precisely all the words, they can still, make inferences. However, it can get to a certain point where, because someone will mistake one word, the rest of the sentence will sort of collapse in terms of how accurate it is. So once, I think, some of these visual problems get to a certain stage, even though that level of inference can't really assist with the sentence.
So you're quite careful with the passages you choose for people to read, that they haven't got this guesswork, but you try and make it.
Unfortunately, it's hard to control for that, because all the passages we use are actually just very generic articles taken from the BBC, because we're hoping that this thing can be applied in real life. Then, because nowadays you have so many things that are digitally available in terms of novels for Kindle, or you can get digital news feeds. So we're hoping, we wouldn't really want to apply it just to, for example, simple sentences where we can make inferences. We want it to just be generally applicable.
I've just got a contribution here from Pam in Cleveland, Ohio. They've worked very hard to find the font that Jack can read, and they found that the Palatino linotype, a medium point pen on coloured paper without lines on it, works well. And the other thing she wanted to share was a Facebook group member uses pink glasses. Boys in Idaho, I think that's so she just wants to share.
I think both of those comments were asked for and shared via the newsletter and the minutes that Celia will be taking with regards to this meeting. So the comments that have come through Skype we will make available to everybody at the meeting too. Are there any other questions for Keir?
Sorry, just very quickly, I'm wondering if it's conceivable that there could be a hereditary link between what you'd regard as normal dyslexia diagnosed in childhood with a susceptibility to PCA. The reason I'm asking is I have a dyslexic brother-in-law, and his mother, my mother-in-law, passed away from PCA.
I'm afraid I don't know enough about developmental dyslexia to really comment on that. And I think from the very little I do know, I think developmental dyslexia seems to be quite heterogeneous. So I think there could be a type more to do with in terms of mapping orthography, so in terms of like the visual information getting from the word into phonology, so in terms of the sounds. But there could be other types of dyslexia that people refer more to people having a sort of jittering, which is supposedly been ameliorated by having things like tinted glasses. So I wouldn't be able to comment on that.
Yes, can I just ask you about, sorry. Can I just ask you about the board that you have to read in the opticians, because one finds the bottom line is able to read, and therefore the optician was telling me that he had very good eyesight when he had already been diagnosed as being sight impaired, and yet he couldn't read the top line of the letters. Now that's not words, that's individual letters. So how does that tie in and become single?
Hopefully, I think that would sort of relate to this really, where again, depending how restricted someone's effective field of vision is, you could see with something like this, the very smallest letters at the bottom of the optician's board. And as long as your acuity was still pretty good acuity, I think referring just as a function of the eyes themselves and also very early parts of the visual system, you can still see the bottom letters, whereas the very large letters, again, you would be obscuring the sort of peripheral side of just even individual letters. So, and yeah, for people on Skype, I'm just showing the figure referring to the restriction in related field of vision.
Following on from that, would therefore a bit later on the person looking at it would see some different things?
In terms of a bit further on in the diagnosis, someone would see different things.
Well, not diagnosis, but further on. Where I'm coming from, I think, is we're looking at the table. Sometimes my wife can see things.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can't.
Yeah.
And that might change within a minute.
Yeah. That, as well as why I said this is an oversimplification as one example, where I think a lot of people refer to it being more problem with visual attention as opposed to, because you have some people, for example, who have strokes who just they lose a part of their vision, they can't see, they're not getting any information out of that. Whereas I think in PCA it could be a case where the fact that it tends to be a bit unpredictable, when sometimes you can, it's more to do with the probability. So for some people, they have a greater chance of finding something consistently in the right side of vision rather than the left side of vision. But yeah, it is, again, it would be good